So our next presenter is Therani Sudarshan. He's a computer scientist, programmer, and hands-on technologist, engineer, startup founder, entrepreneur, and technology consultant. He is deeply interested in discovering the immense practicality of the Indian knowledge systems. His primary research interests lie in symbol systems for representation and intelligence, spanning man-made material systems, naturally occurring systems, and the Indic symbol systems. He comes from the Vishishta Advaita Sampradaya studies, and practices are part of his upbringing and immensely influence every activity. He is also an active participant in the vibrant temple culture and events at many Vishnu temples in Tamil Nadu, and he has also recently been designated as an IFI research scholar. Sudarshan, please take the stage.
So there are also a couple of papers I've done as part of this conference, one on Mimamsa, another one on philology. So this sort of also fits into the entire theme of Pollack's primary intent of removing sacred from Sanskrit and Sanskriti. So this I'm actually arguing in this paper. So I call it the science of the sacred. Okay. So what do I say? I say that the notion of sacred, as defined by Western systems of knowledge, which is the religious systems, the Abrahamic systems, the Western secular systems, and the Western scientific systems, are discussed and juxtaposed with our notion of sacredness. What's the Dharmic notion of sacredness? And also, our sense of sacred is distributed and natural, whereas the Western sense of sacred is centralized. Somebody in the center, somebody will say something is sacred, then you respect it. And it's institutionally enforced. That's an artificial sense of sacred. I contrast that. And I say the flawed understanding of the sense of sacred and the obsession with westernizing India is, I say, the root cause of Pollack's school obsession with desacralising Sanskrit. Because they come from a Western approach of what is sacred. They probably do not even understand the Indian notion of sacred. This is the fundamental thesis. So I discuss, first thing is the Neo-Orientalist discourse on sacredness, and the nature of sacred discourse in the West, and the general nature of Western civilization discourse, and the Dharmic nature of sacred, and then both of these are compared. So what does the Pollack school, or what we call the Neo-Orientalist school, what is exactly their discourse on desacralization? So first of all, who are these people? So latest among the post-colonial scholars deride India and its ethos. So attempts at deriding culture and Indian ethos is very alive and very active among all channels of dissemination. So this is very, very active, that Indian ethos has to be derided. This is going on. So aims to weaken Indian nationhood happens by weakening the fundamental unifying ethos, which is dharma. So if they can attack dharma, India is attacked easily. But the Dharmic sense of, this is from Rajiv's book, the Dharmic sense of sacred is closely tied to the language of Sanskrit and the embedded cultural matrix. This is exactly what they want to attack with all of their thesis. So who is this specific scholar? So he says attempted to undermine the Dharmic civilization via scholarly methods during a career of more than 30 years. So these researchers postulate various theses, primarily by theorizing about the role of the language of Sanskrit. So all of his theories are based on the role of the language of Sanskrit. So I'll just quote a few from his 2006 book. So he says it's an attempt to understand two great moments of transformation in culture and power. Sanskrit was a long or sacred language restricted to religious practice, was reinvented as a code for literary and political expression. And then he says when local speech forms were newly dignified in literary languages and began to challenge Sanskrit, the work of both poetry and polity, and in the end replaced it. He says the vernaculars replaced Sanskrit. So this is his sort of attack on the Sanskrit. So what is this? How does he actually build such theories? So his fundamental assumption behind this theorization is that the split between the sacred and non-sacred is already part of the Indian tradition. He says many of his theses depend on the assumption, which I call the natively present sacred versus non-sacred dichotomies. How does he do that? which is what we're examining in the Sudarshan and all those things, is category misrepresentation. It's a primary slate. Right? He uses this as a basis from which to generalize, and then he formulates divisive thesis based on this. It's fundamental faking. So he mixes up paramarthika, vyavaharika, shruti, non-shruti, oral, written. All these are not distinct categories at all. They are only attributes of bodies of work. So each of these he says are different, and then he splits the one on the left, the paramarthika, shruti, oral, as something which is, in later theories, he says it's something owned by the Brahmins, and is actually is the reason for all the ills of Indian society and should be removed. And what is needed is the vyavaharika, non-shruti and written traditions, which is something that the West will interpret for us via, for example, the Murthy library. This is exactly the approach of the Murthy library. They will interpret vyavaharika, non-shruti and written traditions in the Western lens, or whoever is able to interpret it. This is also his primary misrepresentation, to take adhikara from the Indians to the West. So now, for example, an example of how he is applying Western constructs to India. Alright? So this is the thing on Vyavaharika. Granted, primacy is the conviction that we cannot understand the past until we grasp how those who made it understood what they were making and why. This is never the intent of the Indian tradition. In general, there is a broad enough agreement on the differentia specifica of literature, non-literature to make modern Western distinctions largely unobjectionable. So without any proof, he says we can blindly apply Western distinctions to describe South Asian literary cultures. How he has agreed, who has agreed, we don't know. Then he says another how he applies those constructs. The Catholic Church's eventual monopolization of Latin is an instructive parallel historically and structurally. So there is no way you can apply the timeline of Latin, what happened in the West, to Sanskrit. He does that blindly. He says it can be done. And then he says for most of the first millennium of Sanskrit's existence, we have virtually no evidence for its employment in any domain, as we would call along with Mimamsakas, this worldly. So there's another talk on Mimamsa I gave in the morning. So he says the notion of this worldly is not there in Sanskrit, in the Mimamsa part of Sanskrit. Whereas fundamentally, Mimamsa is all about your action. It's so this worldly. This is a fundamental, again, misrepresentation he is making. So then this realm is outside the practices of the sacred and the forms of knowledge necessarily for the sacred. So he again tries to divide the sacred into this. So all sacred is on the left. So it's very important for him to stress on one on the right, because all of that can make it non-sacred and secular. And all of that so anybody can interpret Ramayana the way they want, the way it's being done, for example. So this is again from Rajiv's book. So desacralization of literature as part of the desamskritization is very important Pollack's overall agenda. Right? And what he calls the Sanskrit cosmopolis is the crucial period in the desacralizing of Sanskrit. So it brings out the confines of the ritual and into the real world. This is sort of the summary from Rajiv's book. So now before that, so what we do is let's discuss what actually sacred means in the West's own academic scholarship and in their civilization. Okay, this is sort of a popular view of what their sacredness is. Right? Okay. So this is the level of spirituality that we see in popular culture. Next thing is the notion of sacred, universal at all. So Western anthropology approaches to this question have yielded many theses. Right? So is a sacred part of every civilization, every human civilization. But all of it fundamentally presupposes a without-centric nature of sacred, in contrast to within-centric formulation of Dharmic sacred. So sacred is always something outside for them. It has to come from outside. That's fundamental difference in all their theses. They're nowhere close to having a within-centric formulation of sacred. So this person is a leading interpreter of religious experience who established paradigms in religious studies that persist to this day. He's Romanian. He studied in West Bengal and all that. So his theory that hierophanies form the basis of religion, splitting the human experience of the reality into sacred and profane, has proved influential in all of Western scholarship. So he says hierophany is something that connotes manifestation of the divine, inherent to the nature of anything sacred. So what does Mercia say? Man becomes aware of the sacred because it manifests itself, shows itself as something different from the profane. The modern Occidental experiences certain uneasiness before many manifestations of the sacred. This is he's saying in 1950. So what's the situation today? It's easy to guess. The sacred is saturated with being. Sacred power means reality and at the same time enduringness and efficacy. The polarity of sacred profane is often expressed as an opposition between real and unreal or pseudo-real. Thus, it is easy to understand that religious man deeply desires to be or to participate in reality to be saturated with power. So, the fundamental discourse of sacred is power-centric. Again, the fundamental understanding of sacredness is power. So, then he calls this the whole abyss. So, he says abyss that divides two modalities of experience, the sacred and profane, will be apparent when we come to describe sacred space in the ritual building of the human habitation, or the varieties of religious experience of time, or the relations of religious man to nature and the world of tools, or the consecration of human life itself. The sacrality of man's vital functions can be charged. So, are you seeing it sacredly or are you seeing it as a profane way? So, that will decide how you do your karma, your vital functions. So, he says, what is modernity then? For modern consciousness, any physiological act is in some only an organic phenomenon. However, much of it may still be encumbered by taboos, imposing, for example, rules, all of this. Right? So, they do not have any sense of sacred in any of those activities. So, modernity means basically anything which you desacralize, non-sacred behavior is modernity. So, sacred and profane are two modes of being in the world, two existences of situations assumed by man in the course of his history. So, they depend on different positions that man has conquered in the cosmos. Hence, they are of concern both to the philosopher and to anyone seeking to discover possible dimensions of human existence. This is the Western understanding of sacred and influential. Then I am going to use Bal Gangadhar's thesis. Okay, so he has studied Western culture against the background of Indian culture. This is his primary thesis, primary tome. So what he says, for the last few hundred years, this is from a new review of his book, academic contexts have been dominated by questions that Europe has asked. The way of asking questions means that it has not asked questions in other ways. So whether adopted by Western intellectuals or non-Western intellectuals who parasitically formulate problems, according to it, that way is tied to Western culture. Only by understanding this can we discover how Indians can ask different questions and what contribution Indian culture make. Speaking a Western language does not mean we understand what it is. So just because we do, let's say, Indology or in English doesn't mean we actually understand Indology in an Indian sense. So it shows that there's a discontinuity of epistemology between Western culture and the cultures of Greece, Rome, and India. It is a kind of discontinuity that depends on very different configurations of learning. This is a very fundamental case, something called as configuration of learning. So what is that? I'll sort of take the next few slides. So what is this? So for the notion of religion is very Western. So religion is an explanatory account of itself and the cosmos. As such, religion fuses a causal and intentional account. So the reason why universe came to be is because God intended to be. And that's also the intention why religion came. So all of these, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, share such a claim, which is why they are the only instance of religion we have. These are the only three religions. Nothing else is a religion. Hinduism is not a religion. None of this is a religion. So as the West, so now since they have this concept of religion, so as they explored, colonized, and expanded, religions were found everywhere because they wanted to find. This did not depend on imperial investigation. They found what they already expected to find. They want to find religion, so they found it. Because the dominant configuration of learning meant that no society was permitted to be without religion. Right? Without religion. All the different kinds of religion could be admitted. So the moment they come and saw Indians doing whatever, they thought it's some religion. Means they must have some sort of controlling authority, some sort of historical thesis. So that's how they even looked at Hinduism. So they assumed that it's universal. Whereas fundamentally it's a Western notion of religion. So now, what should Swadeshi intellectuals actually do? So this is a quote from, again, Balagangadhara. Orientalism cannot be corrected by adducing factual evidence because the basis of its structuring enterprise lies elsewhere. Doing better studies of Hinduism will not disrupt it, but only decorate it. So we have to first understand we are not studying a religion. So then I say, so what's the key insight? He says a provincial experience, the province being Europe, of a small segment of humanity does not become universal by decree. Nor as a specific group, in our case all our Macaulay Putras, we do not become universal audience by merely pretending to be one. So we have to understand our own dharma in our own way, not using the Western lenses. So now, so what's this fundamental difference? One is that notion of religion. So where did that come from? So he introduced a notion called as a root model of order. So he says in the West, the root model of order is religion. This root model controls how you learn as a civilization. So which configures learning by structuring the experience of the world. Typically, the specific way of learning is a knowing about something. Right? So it produces a culture-specific knowledge, a species of knowledge, which is theoretical knowledge. So once you know about something, that is called sciences. You build theories and then you understand a phenomenon using theories. Now, this way of learning, seeking knowledge about something, has generated theoretical knowledge, the natural sciences. What is natural science? It's a species of knowledge that grew out of a religious culture. So what he says, if you are willing to entertain the suggestions, we can take a further step in characterizing religion as or worldview as a root model of order for the West, which produces a specific kind of knowledge, which is theoretical knowledge. So the West's culture creates a learning culture which produces this kind of knowledge, which you can see in the sciences, all of physics theory, all of it based on some theories which they keep updating. So there's nothing practical or final about any of the knowledge the West has produced till today. That's because the root model order, according to his thesis, is this. So now science actually depends on religion. So if religion was a necessary condition for the development of scientific thinking, and as I suggest, new religion generates a culturally specific way of living. What one calls the scientific attitude today is actually the religious attitude of the West. Religion formed it, nurtured it, and gave birth to science as a result. In its absence, as I have suggested, there will be no science. Religion then provides us with the basic model, the most fundamental one of what it is for something to be an explanation. So you have to give a theoretical explanation first. Only then, which is what Abrahamic religion is. They give a theoretical explanation for everything. So what he says, we survive as a species by developing ways of learning that not only give birth to our culture, but also sustain them. So is it possible to have different root models of order? Right? So there, the Western thing was learning about something. So here, the Indian sense, the configuration of learning as cultural answers, the fundamental question we ask is how to live. Okay, we don't want to know what something, we want to know how should I live my life. Or rather, how to go about in the world. So it's both a question and the answer becomes performative in nature. So we are not a theoretical culture or theoretical civilization, we are a performative civilization. That's why stress on karma and all rituals. So ritual, like religion, so we are a ritual culture, not a religious culture. So ritual brings about a culturally specific way of going about in the world. So in a configuration of learning generated by it, performative learning dominates and learning to do rituals is performative. So what happens, the way in which members of this culture go about in the world is itself ritualized. Finally, the configuration of learning generated by the ritual is stable because the ritual culture is recursive structure. Each person will have his interpretation of the practice. There is not some primordial truth in some theory. So it's a practical ritual nature, the root culture of Indian civilization. So the West is religious, theoretical, textual. So India is ritual, practical. Yeah, ritual, practical, and performative. So then we come to what's actually, so given these two backgrounds of Mercia Eliade and Balagandhara, what does it mean for sacred in a dharmic sense? So it's axiomatically sacred. So it is built on the fundamental basis of Veda, oral signified chants, that encapsulate the basis of cosmological existence. So out of this 11, 13 branches, only 1% are still remaining. The Shastra Shrauta, they form the basis of Shruti, not of divine origin. The Smriti genre of literature, the darshanas, metatexts, also describe the sacred in different dimensions. It's all about nature of sacred only. Fundamentally, everything is axiomatically sacred. So all of the practice genres, stotra, mantras of literature, experiential entry points into the sacred dimension. The all-encompassing sacrality of the Dharmic nature of knowledge and its vast literatures is unquestionable to anyone living here. So deeply practical culture of learning and embodied living is of all that is unique to Dharmic living has at its core the nature of sacred. To say that there is nothing sacred is neither groundbreaking nor innovative scholarship. This is a fundamentally sacred. This is an example I made in the other talk. So it's like somebody critiquing quantum physics, but he does not believe 1 plus 1 equal to 2. He does not believe in the axioms of math or science, but then he is going to go and critique quantum physics, for example. So the fundamental notion here is everything is sacred. And then you can interpret only on that dimension. So now, but then his critiques have got value because they are of a sociological nature. So what he says, a critical discursive dimension of desacralization narrative is to focus on the socialism of society. Why is there validation of Pollock? Because he focuses on the social ills. But then he attributes them to the core tenets of Dharmic society. So poverty, illness, colonization, social stratification, all of these are attributed to the nature of Dharma. He says because Dharma and its sense of sacred makes society weak. Because of that only you have been all of the ABC, all the things he will list. So he says the stronger way for society is violence and conquest, which is the Western way. So that's the fundamental motive. So how does he do it? So the philological methods of Pollock aim at excavating via political philology, sociological ills through creative analysis of texts, and then the prescriptive application via liberation philology Western approach is presented as a solution to all of these ills. This in short is the essence of the Pollockian discourse. So it is driven by religion, centrally controlled, theoretical, it's learning driven by theory, the sense of sacred is not important. So desacralization of Indian knowledge systems and practices becomes essential. If you do not desacralize, you cannot control India. You cannot westernize India. So it's very fundamental to all of Western thesis. So that is the primary motive of Western scholarship. So what do we do now that we know this is their motive? So I say the theoretical discourse and the resulting practical process of desacralization will continue. It will happen. It's part of the nature of Western root model of order. It's part of the Western civilization. So scholarship which acknowledges realities and provides coherent narratives based on Dharmic root models of order, practice-centric configurations of learning, and the Dharmic ethos are essential. So there can be no compromise on that. That's the...
Any questions? How do we fit in?
Actually, the whole digitization is a huge advantage to us because it's a practical framework, right? So it is like it's an amplifier for what you want to do. So that's the way you have to look at it. So digitization, it's just a channel of faster communication, faster knowledge dissemination, faster response and reaction. So any doubts and clarifications we have can be clarified much more faster. We needn't have these problems festering for 200 years without us answering it. So we should use it for our advantage, not only for responding, but for knowing our own critics better. We can understand ourselves critically much more better with digital technology than without. So I think before we go to globalization, I think digital technology helps us understand ourselves inside India far better. So people in South India can understand North India much more today with WhatsApp and Facebook and Twitter. That is much more important to me in my perspective than people understanding the West.
But are we using it?
Yes, it is being used in all forms. So the thing is, how much of the form, or rather, see today, from my experience, let's say getting the background of the question. So what do we do? How do we bring this message across to the youth? So for them it's like I said, a practical, they will want to experience everything. Right? So if you are able to provide in their channel of experience, what it is that you represent or what it is that your dharma represents, then we have a chance. If your sense of nature, civilization, culture is not on those channels, they will not even get exposed to it. They will not even get exposed to it because those channels are dominated by the other discourse.
Here is the challenge.
Yeah, it is definitely a challenge, but ignoring it is in our peril. If we ignore it,
No, it's not I think question of ignoring it. Somebody like me, I'm computer ignorant because there is so much else that's happening. And not all Vidwans or scholars like you and Swamiji, whose thing was shown before, Satyanarayan Dasa, are conversant with the modern technology. So because India is very vast and everything is so big, how do we really make it a real wave, a real movement?
okay, so first thing, answering question, so one is the channel and one is the educational or rather the curricula. The curricula itself should be structured such that it is digitally created, produced, and the pedagogy is digital, and the content should be dharmic.
The content
It should, yes, the content is the issue, it's not a channel. Digital is just a channel. The content is still, we have to put effort on the content. That is the key thing. Modifying content for the channel is fine. That can be done. But the main thing is, do we even have original proper content of our stuff in schools today? If we have all crazy textbooks in print, we get the same crazy textbooks on the digital format also. So the content creation is the primary activity. I agree with you. I agree.
I think in your wonderful talk, but I think you missed a very central dichotomy between the Abrahamic and the Dharmic. That the Abrahamic, by the very nature of God being external and intermediate, and the only way we have access is through prophets, and he stopped sending them for whatever reason. So now we have to go to books which those prophets wrote, and their history, and hence their history centrism. That versus our approach that everything is sacred and there is divine presence everywhere. So I don't have to depend on some external prophet who came long ago, but I have access through various means. So even if all the historical records were gone, dead, finished, the point is some rishi will come, some yogi will come who will get this. Because of the sacredness of everything, it is possible. Therefore, what the prophet got is not gone and all forever. We can have any number. I think this is so central differentiation. If you focus on this, you will see a whole new insight as to why they're doing what they're doing in terms of finding our sacredness threatening. It is threatening. And the Christian obliteration of pagan was because the pagans had this kind of idea, similar, not the same, but similar, they were not exactly the same. The pagans were obliterated in order for Christianity, for these Abrahamic religions to survive. Even Islam went around doing that. So their survival, success, and whatnot has been built on the obliteration of this sacredness, this ubiquitous sacredness. The grand clash is between that view they have and the sacredness everywhere. That's the grand clash of civilizations, in which so far they feel they won. So now comes the chapter of encounter with Hinduism. Immediately it reminds them of all that. Big threat. You cannot let it come into our American and our Western life too much. Up to a point is okay. We can enjoy the tabla and we can enjoy some tandoori food. That kind of good yoga. But this business of getting really into all this will undermine the whole edifice of the structure. So this is a very important point you should make in anything. I know that those guys have written all that, but I think this is a very fundamental point that they've missed, these guys.
Agreed.
Now, the question is, okay, so if this is a big difference between the profit-oriented religions, which you can also say is P-R-O-F-I-T, profitable. Profit-centric is profitable religion, and this dharmic sacred religion, metaphysically so different, have resulted in a power structure in the world of one defeating the other so far in political terms. Okay. So this is a basic thing you have to understand. Now all their scholars and all that, when they come here, that's the first thing they have to remove. They can say, we love your Sanskrit, but we'll remove the sacred. We love the Ramayana as a pure poetry, kavya. All kind of things, we will take the Natya Shastra, all kind of our performing arts and remove this sacred dimension, then it is safe. Otherwise, our young people are going to absorb it, digest it, and it will act like a poison pill and kill the Abrahamic things. So I think that has to come out as to why sacred is so big a problem, other than doing lip service to it. And I didn't see that come out. That sort of a theory of it. Okay. And then from there you can look at science and all that later also, how science fits in here, how it fits in there. But I think the basic pillar of differentiation.
So it's a threat for them.
Yeah, but you have to first elaborate and explain what is the sacred versus their view of the world, religion versus sacred, religion versus dharma. This kind of a history centrism is a very important point to, foundation I think you need to think about. Do you have a comment on that? I mean, what do you think?
I did mention a little bit in the Mimamsa talk on the whole notion of history and all that. So I sort of want to take a different approach using the English text itself. So agree with you. I'm with you there.
Yeah. So, and this,
I argued that point from a Mimamsa perspective, but not from more general sacred perspective.
Yeah. Just continuing on Rajivji's push of how your thought train should have been, just wanted to ask you if you had explored out in deep the big underlying undercurrent in the Western thinking of this notion of desacralization as the separation of church from state, and the fact that the separation of church from state itself is like power-centricness being split, and more importantly, how did this church try to regain that power back? Because they have done it in a very subtle way. And if so, what does it mean for us? Because to us, what Rajivji says and what every one of us understands is sacredness is like breathing air. You don't separate, right? And if they are attacking that, can we decipher that out so we can counter it a lot more effectively? That's my question to you.
Yeah, okay. So on this separation of church and state, again, from a deeper perspective, theoretically they say actually it's again just a superficial separation. There's actually no separation that really happens. The state is today still the church. That's one perspective that they take. Okay, that's one perspective. The American Constitution, or rather the country, is still a Christian country. There's actually no separation. Exact. I agree. So the subtle.
How did they manage to do that? Have we deciphered that out? And if so, can those parameters, yardsticks, be defrogged in our context such that this dharma as an intrinsic part of our thinking, which is very different from the way they think, can be brought out, and therefore the invalidity of their propositions in explaining us?
Okay, so the answer to the question is, because our dharma is practical, we'll have to do it and show. We can talk, we can do all of this. If we continue to wear Western clothes, for example. Now, I'm just giving an example, for example. So let's say a university graduation, for example. So all the wearing of gowns and all that. So once you remove all the external symbols, it will happen. So unless we take practical steps, it will not. Theoretically, we can attack anything they want. Nothing is going to happen. Practically, we still wear Western clothes.
No, I think that is a
No. I think that's very critical.
I'm talking about the thought processes.
Correct.
The decision-making ability.
Correct.
The foundations for what is called as power structures.
Correct.
Can we bring that out, much more appropriate?
Okay, from of the West.
Obviously, they are attacking us. So
Correct. Okay, fine. That can be done. Yeah. I mean, in terms of solution, we cannot solve it theoretically. All I'm saying. If you really want to counter that, yeah. I mean, if you want to solve it, it has to be practically. We can't do it. Yeah.
Darpan Majumdar, beautiful presentation, I think. But one point to you and Rajiv ji also. So when we think about Sanskrit as a language, the notion of it being religious neutral is something which constantly now I think comes across. So when we talk about Sanskrit in your study, do you think, and also Rajiv ji, if you want to mention, that especially now a lot of people who are actually learning, there's a lady called Rohini Bakshi, which Jim Allison told me about, which she's doing a decent work on Sanskrit on Twitter. So should we, as a Hindu, when I talk about Sanskrit, should I keep it religion neutral, or it has to
It can be religion neutral, but should be dharmic.
How do as me as an individual, I don't know, I'm not able to explain it in proper words, but you get it.
I mean, my answer is it can be religiously neutral, but should be dharmic.
So Rohini Bakshi is a protege of Pollock. Had turned loose a lot of some not so little. Devdutt Patnaik, another one. Okay. Yeah. So this whole idea of let's promote the Sanskrit, which is not linked with the sacred, is a part of this whole strategy to undermine. So I'll come to your house and I'll say, I really appreciate many, many things, but we got to get rid of your heart, It's that sort of and our people are going for it. Our people are unfortunately falling for it because it's very nicely presented, a lot of money thrown at it and things of that sort. One quick point regarding separation of church and state. This has enabled Italy to have 2 votes in the UN because Vatican has a vote.
Yeah, that's a practical use of
So the Roman Empire never died. It got reincarnated as the Vatican, but the original state also survived. It's really true. The Roman Empire now is church, is the Roman Empire. Yeah, it is a proper state.
Yeah, the ambassador is called Nuncio, N-U-N-C-I. I have a little comment, which of course has been part of the larger discourse for some time. But I think in answer to what you asked, I believe that unless the word secular is removed from our constitution, which was brought in in 1972 by Indira Gandhi. See, when you're talking of dharma, then I think secular dharma nirapeksha, it makes no sense. It makes no sense because they have already interpreted dharma as religion, what you described, the Brahmic and all that. Whereas our dharma is not that. Dharmo rakshati rakshitaha, etc., etc. So I think there is a lot to do, a lot to be done. But in the present atmosphere, it's so difficult. I mean, all these are wonderful. I mean, I congratulate Rajiv and IGNC and everyone who's participating. But how do we bring such discourses in mainstream? How do we do that? I think that is a larger question that we tried to, that you took it to Madras, Chennai IIT. JNU doesn't want it. The hubs where people need to hear, they need to think, they need to have arguments, discussions. Unless that happens more and more in larger perspective, I think we will try, maybe another 30 years. But if we want it to happen in 3 years and 5 years, then we'll have to really make an all-out effort. I mean, it will be a fight to finish, I'm sorry to say. Yeah, any other question, please? Yes, please.
In fact, this is not a question. In fact, it's a comment that we will have to stop looking at or follow the Durkheimian concept of profane versus sacred. We do not follow that, in fact. We must understand that. We can take a cue from Dome. The same Dome who is actually falling into the Antyaj category, when we die, he becomes Dome Raja, the one who liberates. Until unless Dome gives us Agni, we are not liberated. We cannot have moksha at all. So this idea of sacred and profane falling, there is too much of interspersing into each other. So we must get rid of this whole Durkheimian paradigm of sacred versus profane. In fact, it's something different for us. So Indian paradigm has to be looked into differently, I believe. Yeah, thank you.
That's why I said that whole sacred profane is a Western view of seeing sacred. That was sort of that was a segment of the talk.
I would just, may I just come in for a second? I'm sure many of you are aware of the Buddhist tantric traditions, the Vajrayana, and the 16 siddhas and all that. I've done a little bit work on that and danced. But there, because it was a question asked by a very simple lady in Trichur some years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, that why is it all the compositions that are sung and danced to the classical tradition, although they are written 90% by men, saints or poets or whoever, by the Kshetrajna or Tyagaraja, or they are all addressing the women, the goddesses, or as consort of Shiva. Parvati would be mother of Parvati, consort of Shiva, wife of Shiva. O Devi, Radha would be the beloved of Krishna, never addressing them directly as my beloved. We dare not do it. Her question was, is there any example? And I was flummoxed. I said, give me time. And here my friend, my guide, Jivan Paniji, he brought out the Charya Gitis, the Charyas. And most of them written by Kanapa, who is from Odisha, Krishnapada, Milarepa, Tilopa, Naropa, the 16 siddhas. They address directly to the woman, the goddess, or the prana shakti, and they are usually the dome woman or the sabari, the tribal woman. And this is one example that we found, and that falls within the Indic ambit. So somewhere I think we can, as you asked, that we have that, but it's not known, and we need to bring all these things mainstream.
Yeah, thank you.